Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 20 cable stations from Vermont to New York City and 24/7 on the internet at thestruggle.org. You recall that British Member of Parliament George Galloway issued a call for citizens to defy the siege of the Gaza Strip. And last winter, he led a delegation from Britain to Gaza. He did another one, again, of mostly Americans, 200, that went on July 4th, American Independence Day, through Egypt to Gaza. Corey Peterson Smith was one of those who was on the Viva Palestina U.S. delegation. We're giving over today's whole show for his description of the things that he saw of the Israeli, Egyptian, and U.S. torture of the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip.
The notion behind Viva Palestina U.S. was that we could take 200 U.S. citizens and say, despite the fact that our government is funding the siege of Gaza, there are people in the U.S. who actually stand with the people in Gaza. And that was the idea, in addition to bringing medical aid, which was the stated purpose of the trip. So, as Stan said, on the 4th of July, we converged at JFK Airport and took truckfuls of crutches and wheelchairs and other medical supplies and loaded them onto to airplane and flew to Cairo. And I'll speak now about Egypt, which is actually where the bulk of my trip, that was the bulk of the experience, was actually in Cairo. A word about Egypt is that it's a dictatorship. It's run by a man named Hosni Mubarak, who's been in power since 1981. He declared emergency rule in 1981 and has maintained a dictatorship for the past 28 years, in which Egyptians have no political rights. It's actually illegal in Egypt for a group of more than 3 people to gather on a political basis. And the police have the right to break up a gathering of more than 3 people. So that's Egypt. And one of the things that became really painfully evident is that was the extent of the complicity of the Egyptian government with the attack on Gaza. Before I went to the Middle East this time, I knew that Egypt played a role, but I thought it was a passive, complicit role in the siege of the Palestinians in Gaza. The truth is that it plays a very active participatory role in the whole attack. Egypt could stop the siege instantaneously because it controls one of the borders. All they would have to do is open up the gates and let the aid flow in and let people out and in and so on, but they choose not to. The reason why is because while the U.S. gives $6 billion in aid to Israel each year. Israel is the #1 recipient of aid in the world from the United States. Egypt is actually #2. The U.S. gives $2 billion a year in aid to Egypt, all of which is going to defend an unpopular dictatorship by Hosni Mubarak. And it's very evident that one of the things that's immediately evident upon arriving in Egypt is the massive police apparatus, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the point is that the Egyptian government works with the United States and with the Israeli government in collusion against the Palestinians. All the time in Cairo, we got a taste of the incredible surveillance apparatus that Egyptians have to live with every day. And so just to say a little bit what it looks like, there are uniformed police officers everywhere in Cairo, and there are all kinds of uniforms for what I imagine are different police forces, some of which are patrolling the streets, some of which are riot police, and so on. But there are also secret police called the Mukhabarat, who are wearing suits. It's not so secret when you see the Uzis sticking out at their back pocket. So when we got into Cairo, on our first day there, I was in the hotel lobby with a man named Ibrahim, who was one of the brothers on the convoy, and he left his suitcase unattended for a minute. And this officer walks up to him and says, "Is that your suitcase?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I need you to open it up and show me what's inside." Ibrahim says, "No problem." So he takes the suitcase, opens it up, and instantaneously 7 men converge upon them, 7 guys in suits. And that's when it became clear to me that at any given point, people who men who just seemed to be kind of standing around in the hotel lobby. A certain number of them were actually secret police. On our first night in Cairo, a bunch of us went out to eat, 10 or 15 of us, and the police followed us, not so secretly. There were a couple of uniformed officers, but there were a bunch of plainclothes officers as well. And it was so conspicuous that eventually they just started talking to the people who were in the group, those of us who were Arabic speakers. So we were walking down the street in Cairo. There's a handful of police sort of walking with us, basically. And then there's a truck full of police slowly driving next to us on the sidewalk. We go out to eat, the police come in to eat too, you know. We have dinner, they have dinner, we get up, we leave, they follow us again, and so on. That was one thing, and that surveillance just continued right through the end. It included surveillance on our meetings. There was one big meeting that we had. There were different points at which the convoy was sort of split up, with different people around Cairo gathering aid. At one point, we split off into actually different cities in Egypt. But there was one meeting toward the end of the trip where we had a big meeting, and everybody was sort of reunited after being in different places for a while. And we were having a discussion about how we're going to get into Gaza, and then George Galloway, who's leading the convoy, says, I just want to point out to everybody that there's an officer in the back of the room who seems to be taking notes. And sure enough, this guy in a suit was there with a cell phone that was on. I don't know if he was just recording it or if he was live feeding, you know, what was happening in our meeting, and he was taking notes the whole time. So that was some of the surveillance that we experienced. There were a bunch of times in which we tried to go to Gaza, and our efforts were sort of thwarted. One of which, in most of those, we would rent these buses to go up to Gaza, load up all of this aid that we had brought with us, decorate the buses with flags and so on, and kind of wait for the word from the Egyptian government, the go-ahead that we could actually go and proceed. And after waiting all day, they would tell us that no, you actually can't. And so we'd unload the buses, put all the aid back in the hotel rooms and so on, and try it again the next day. One of those times, we loaded up the buses with aid, decorated them, and actually headed out. At this point, the convoy was split in two groups, one of which was in Alexandria and was purchasing a bunch of the aid that we wanted to bring with us to Gaza. And I'll just say a little bit about that before I get into the story of our effort to cross at that point. We brought a certain amount of medical aid from the United States, but we also bought quite a lot of it in Egypt. We bought medicine. We found out upon arrival in Cairo that there was a real need for paper in Gaza, because among the things that have been kept out is paper. You can't run a society without paper. So we were collecting paper, and one of the things that we wanted to was to purchase some trucks, some pickup trucks that we could drive the aid on to Gaza and then leave there with the people who needed trucks. So a group of the convoy, about 70 folks, went to Alexandria to purchase these trucks. The remainder of us tried to go not to Gaza but to Al Arish, which is a town basically on the border of Gaza, near Rafah. And so we loaded up our buses, decorated them with flags and everything, and we headed out, and there were about 5 buses full of people in aid, not full, mostly full of aid, and then there were just a few of us in each bus. But leading the convoy of buses was a truck of police. Behind the convoy was a truck of police. On our side was a police car following us, and in each bus was a secret police officer, actually. Again, not so secret, because he was the Egyptian guy in the suit. Once we got to the Suez Canal, which is sort of a major crossing point, that's on one side of the Sinai Peninsula, and on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula is Gaza. And so we got to this bridge, which is actually called the Mubarak Peace Bridge. Crosses the Suez Canal. And our convoy was driving, and we sort of crossed lanes and went to this lane, and I was in the lead bus right behind the truck of police. And our lane had concrete barriers blocking it off, and so we stopped there. And they said, you actually can't cross the bridge. And we said, well, why not? And they said, oh, the bridge is closed now. And we're seeing all these other cars crossing.